All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to, for those of you who are just joining, the first postdoctoral conference of Southern Africa, a great initiative taken by Stellenbosch University and the Postdoctoral Society. Thanks for organizing it. So as part of the postdoctoral conference, we are going to have a workshop, one of two workshops today, regarding climate-smart agriculture and urbanization. So we're going to have some perspectives around what is happening with climate variability and the migration of rural populations into urban centers. So I'm going to focus over onto the slideshow now. We can consider a footprint. Nowadays, a footprint can be taken as a quantification method. Let's think about a carbon footprint, where you measure energy and CO2 emission. We can also think about the ecological footprint, where you measure how much of hectares of land is actually being used wisely and sustainably. And then, of course, we have the water footprint, which is going to feature quite prominently in this little introduction that I'm going to give you before I hand over to the rest of the workshop speakers, whom I'll introduce. So take the footprint and let's make it a bit more complex with the ecological and the climate and the water and the carbon emissions. We can look at climate change as somewhat of an umbrella that could affect everything that we require in our normal life to sustain health, to sustain food security, to sustain nutritional security. I'm not going to talk on every single one of these aspects, but the biggest focus is going to be around agriculture, urbanization, water, and climate change. How does climate change affect our agricultural system? How does the water footprint, which we will discuss, affect our food production? And of course, urbanization, a key factor. Urbanization is globally a big concern because our urban centers are getting bigger and bigger. When we look at South Africa and the growth, both in the last couple of decades and also the prediction into the future, there has been a massive growth. And we think a 5% growth in South Africa might be small, but it's considerably large given the amount of people that is living in South Africa. So urbanization is a very real thing where people migrate from rural to urban centers. And we can almost look at a photo of Cape Town City. Where is all the food going to come from? How are we going to sustain the growth of our urban centers? Can we come up with some creative solutions? And I would like to drive discussion points at the end of the workshop around the solutions. Let's think about vertical farming, edible walls and balconies. These are all things that's currently coming up in the news. A very big topic of discussion. We look at greenhouse rooftop farming. This is one of the ways we could use our innovation and create sustainable farming units within an urban center. So urbanization is not the only impingement on our food security. We also have to look and consider climate variability. One of the biggest factors that climate variability causes is drought. And you can see drought damages almost half of our crop production. And just on the cusp of that is our animal production, two of our biggest food requirements. How do we overcome climate variability in this day and age? What is our vision for the next 100 years? Let's think about drought and water and the connection between the two. Yes, water is absolutely important. No life can be sustained without water. But do we ever consider the production line, the virtual footprint of water? And this refers to the value chain from resource to good on the market. We can think about a cow, for example. It has to eat, it has to drink water. When we need to eat it, for those of us who are not vegan, we buy it in the shop, and we don't understand how much of water has gone into the process of actually bringing it from animal to product. And that is thousands of liters. That's called the hidden water, the virtual water. How do we track that? How do we consider that? And when we look at a water-scarce agriculture system, where are the pressure points in this hidden footprint? Let's look at two of the major crops in South Africa, maize and wheat, 900 liter per kilogram, and that's to produce a kilogram, not to produce the product. How much of hidden water goes into producing an actual product from farm to table? 1,300 liters of water per kilogram wheat. Can we address this in a more sustainable manner? Can we think about alternate crops? Let's think about soybean or pigeon pea. Some of you might never have heard about pigeon pea, but definitely soybean uses considerably less water, 250 and 50 liters per kilogram to produce. And these alternate crops are often known as orphan crops, something with exceptionally high nutritional value, but often ignored on the basis of its low economical value. These are things that we can consider given a hidden footprint of water. So we need smart solutions, climate and urban smart solutions. This is not Photoshop. This is an actual smart city in Singapore. Imagine, can we do that? And how do we get there in South Africa? What do we need to take into consideration? It is a very real thing, urbanization. Our urban centers are getting more and more populated. This impinges on our agroeconomical output, but also many smallholder farmers are now actually moving into the cities. That takes away a lot of food and potentially places a lot of strain on the commercial agricultural scale in terms of food production. So I'm going to leave this thought with the audience, and I would like to then welcome our speakers. The first speaker to come up is Professor Danie Brink. He is the Dean of Agri-Sciences at Stellenbosch University, and I would like to welcome Professor Brink to give the first talk in the workshop.
Let me try the mic in the static position. Thank you very much for the invitation, even on a Friday afternoon. And there were no conspiracy between me and you with regard to the urbanization aspects. Obviously, if you look at the aims of the workshop, there was a lot of key words just in the briefing that we got. Too much, to attend to properly in any one of the time slots, but all of them, as relevant as you can imagine. If we break down a little bit, what the Earth offers us in terms of available land surface compared to the oceans and what that is used for. 70% of that, 30% near, is habitable. Of that, 50% goes into agriculture. Of that 50%, it breaks down into livestock and crops, which respectively supply 17% of calorie requirements and 30% odd on protein requirements. But it gives you an idea already, how just the surface area of the world is actually utilized, by us, and for what select purposes we use it for. If you just look at the time scale, which is, literally takes us quite a long way back, but the movement is all very recent, how the cropland that is in use long-term by man, it just absolutely shot up during the last 100 years period on all the continents. So all of a sudden, huge increase in land space utilized, by man. But at the same time, if you go back to what is available, for agriculture, and if you express that per capita, just from the 1960 onwards, how the per capita availability has decreased in all the continents, if we concern mainly, even with Africa. And that is obviously due to population growth that will bring down the per capita availability of arable land space for use in agriculture. On the other hand, if you look at what technology and management systems, whether it is fertilizers or crop protection or GMO and conventional breeding, has brought about huge increase also of late in the modern era in terms of yield and efficiencies, in terms of crop yield. Also, this is in maize production in America, massive increases through new technologies and management systems. And at the same time, if you express it in terms of productivity indicator, the same food, what we produced in 1960 on a full unit of usable land at the time, that same quantity of food is now produced on in 32% of land. So that shows you how efficient agriculture is becoming, and it is still improving and rejuvenating itself. So from this we can see there's massive requirements for land, massive expansion of land, also improved productivity, and it seems as if we're coping with the requirements, of yesterday and today. But obviously a conversation like today is more about what's due to happen tomorrow. We've already shared a few quantitative bits of information, but if we just pick urbanization as a driver for change, of which agriculture has very little to do with it. People are not migrating because of agriculture. Agriculture is trying to keep up and respond to that behavior. Annually, it's about 65 million people worldwide that are moving into cities, and it's already more than 50% of the global population is already in cities. Within the next 30 years, it's expected to increase so that nearly 3/4 of all people on earth will be living in cities. And even if you look just in Africa, at the moment, 472 million people. It's the continent with the fastest urbanization rate in the world. Already 10% of world population is living in African cities, and that is expected to increase to over 20% just living in African cities. And in that same era, urban dwellers will start to outnumber rural residents in Africa. And the key drivers for that is obviously expansion of the population, but also expectation of better lives, particularly amongst unemployed youth, which is the highest mobility into cities, is in that particular category there. And that obviously is then a big driver, and the question is, okay, but what is the outlook for urban food security if you measure it against the key aspects of it with regard to availability, safety, access, which include affordability. And you will see that the demand just for staple foods in the cities is expected to increase by nearly 5% a year. And that has given rise to a new outlook and a new awareness about the role of urban and peri-urban agriculture. And currently, particularly, it's more, together the two contribute somewhere between 15 and 20% of world food consumption. It's already coming out of that urban and peri-urban zone, but the bulk of it is coming out of that peri-urban zone, not yet the urban zone. And if we break it down, there's three components to these urban, peri-urban agriculture. Those that are land-based, and that is the new thing, rooftop, and also that is happened in controlled environments. And due to a lack of time, I don't know whether you can share the presentations, but you can digest the underlying information and considerations. For example, rooftop is driven by alternative use of space. There's huge complications in terms of liability and maintenance. It still requires a lot of high startup costs. And those rooftops, if you don't put it in greenhouses, expose you to very extreme weather conditions, much more at the rooftop than down in the street. But there's just some breakdown of considerations that you should keep track of. But it also looks completely different depending from what perspective you look at it. The rooftop garden in Lagos in Nigeria, I think it was a creative sort of establishment there, looks totally different from one in New Jersey. And even a land-based farm in Kenya at the backdrop of an electricity power system certainly looks different from what you may find in the Netherlands. So don't lose that particular perspective. And if you then look at particularly, because I think if you talk about urban food security, urban farming, we in Africa, Stellenbosch is pretty much part of Africa, but the conversation should be around Africa, and we're dealing with low-income countries. And the rationale there for urban agriculture is how to improve household access to food, alternative income-generating activities, and also to improve population health. So these are the key drivers. It brings new opportunities for changing gender roles in that particular objectives. You see major dietary shifts and preferences that develop in the cities, and completely new value chains and niche markets developing, and that becomes possible in that regard. But there's also challenges. For example, in Asia, we see that urbanization has brought about a rapid improvement in terms of poverty rates, which we don't see in Africa. Socio-economic development, in other words, in Africa we see urbanization, but we don't see improvement in poverty. And so the focus in urban, peri-urban agriculture is largely in terms of subsistence rather than commercial, at least the case already in Asia. And still, you can't get away with it. You still require access to land and to capital, and you require appropriate technologies to drive it forward. The question then is, how does the urban agriculture adapt in terms of crop science, even livestock interventions, how the market responds, and the food safety interventions that include animal welfare. For example, if you farm animals in the city, forget about the plants for a moment, huge animal welfare issues to keep animals in these urban environments. And you still need solutions for intensification, much more efficient outputs in terms of these systems is required to get a return on your investment. As mentioned, there's environmental and human health concerns and waste management, because believe it or not, they generate a lot of waste if you produce. And also if you think about knowledge gaps, there's no proper policy in place to govern these things. The city can't govern itself, it erupts in social chaos in one form or another. There's huge challenges in terms of design studies and technologies, how to package that, even existing technologies, and also how can urban agriculture contribute simultaneously to economic and social well-being whilst managing its own environmental risks. And there's no solutions for all of this as yet, because it's a fairly new era phenomenon. And at the same time, the technologies is just exploding, and you can run out sort of cliches from aeronomics and aquanomics and hydroponics, and it's all over the place. It's just an explosion of technology, very high tech, and you can get carried away with that easily. But if you then look right at the end, at the moment ask the question, what is the viability currently of advanced, particularly these high-tech indoor urban agriculture systems? Its analysis will show it's highly dependent, the success of those systems, on location, exactly what your business model is, what is the market requirements and capabilities around you, and also whether your business model allows for diversification of income around that agricultural activities. And it's also, there's some limitations to it. It mainly focuses on premium organic products and also supply into high-end consumer platforms. It's a relative small contributor at this stage to the global food system. It doesn't say it's not important, but at the moment its contribution is quite small, largely limited to greens, and it do not offer a balanced food basket also for the city requirements. So these are all challenges that we must find solutions for. Probably the only good exception on this, particularly with the new interpretation of the South African legal system, dare I say more of it. So therefore, if you look at it from an agriculture perspective, I think urban agriculture is responding to what humans does. And at the moment, it's a massive movement into cities. First of all, there was a lot of development plans and strategies how to put a stop to it. And even now in South Africa, people looking for solutions for rural development. And yet we can't stop, the change, and the forecast will even get better. If you think about a country such as Africa, South Africa is the only country in Africa which is a net food exporter. Can you believe that? The whole of the continent. The only country in Africa that is a net food exporter. And that's by means of value. And the only reason why we manage it, we export high value products. And per volume, we still have a food deficit, but per value, we have a food surplus situation. It's a phenomenon that is here to stay. It's not fully developed yet. It's complicated, as I said, and it's also depending from what perspective you're looking at it, whether from a low-income country or first world city. And even in that, the facet that is the most complicated, the least viable, and also making the smallest contribution is this high-tech. This high-tech section that is, from a science perspective, really very glamorous and interesting. But that's not the one that is providing the solutions where we are today, but it is engaging and evolving with technologies. I was at a symposium in America amongst, and I was fortunate to be there. It was the deans of the land-grant and agriculture-focused universities together with the MD of the big food companies. And when they had to come up with 3 things that they think will play a big role in future, urban agriculture was one thing that they're watching closely to see how that responds, because it could become a disruptive technology in the agriculture value chain. So people high up in agribusiness and in agriculture technology is watching the space, so it's a very actual debate. And thank you for the opportunity to contribute to it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Next, I would like to invite Professor Jennifer Thomson.
While we're getting it up, I'm delighted to be here, and I must really congratulate the postdocs for this terrific initiative of having a conference for African postdocs, and I think it's wonderful. It's great to be here, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to tell you a story that begins and ends with a question. And the story is about 25 years old, because that's when we started this work, somewhere around then. And so, can we develop drought-tolerant maize? And I'm only speaking here on behalf of many, many others, most of whom I hope I'm going to be able to mention. We all know that. I don't even have to tell you what the problems are. And we are not the only group that's working on drought-tolerant maize. This is the WEMA project, Water Efficient Maize for Africa, which is an African-wide or Eastern Southern Africa-wide that's run, a gene donated by Monsanto, breeding in the different areas, and it's actually being commercially tested in South Africa this year. So we'll be able to see how that's going. And it's run by the African Agricultural Technology Foundation that's based in Nairobi. And I was the founding chair of the board. And I used to go around the world talking about the WEMA project, and I'd come back to my lab and they'd say, why are you talking about the opposition? And I used to say, actually in this field there is no opposition, because we don't know what's going to work. And something that works in one country and one environment might work in another and not in you get my point. So we need as many options as we can. So how the story began, it began with Sagadi van Nandri. He'd done a PhD in America, and he developed a strategy for looking for genes that could confer functional sufficiency. That means that under certain conditions, if you introduce a gene into E. coli, it will function and supply the lac. And what it is a sorbitol with a transposon in it. So E. coli cannot grow on sorbitol. And anything that can produce an osmoprotectant is likely to be able to confer some sort of drought tolerance. So the idea is to screen potential genes which allow E. coli to grow on sorbitol-containing mutants, and then where will we find such genes? And now comes Jill Farrant into the whole process. Because Jill Farrant is a physiologist and is desiccation seed physiologist, and we've been very lucky throughout our program to have Jill as a part of it, because she introduced us to resurrection plants. Why not get, the WEMA project relies on one gene from Bacillus subtilis, so we thought let's get a few genes from a local plant that Jill thinks might have some relevance to us. So a resurrection plant, when it's hydrated, it looks like that, and when it's dehydrated, it's dead. Hey, of course it's dead. You add water, and you go from that to that in something like 72 hours or so, depending on which. It's a miracle plant. So, as Jill said, go and look for some genes there. So I wouldn't be telling you this if we hadn't. And so we did. I had another postdoc in my lab who left to start Sunmeal Seeds, I think it's called. And so I said to her, have you got Xerophyta on your product list? And she says, yeah, but it doesn't sell very well because it only flowers for 2 days. And who wants to buy a horticultural plant that flowers for 2 days? There you can see some of the little flowers. So we went up into the Drakensberg and we collected these plants, and there we all are. And each person had to bring back a plant. We got permission from the Parks Board and bring back a resurrection plant to work on. Oh, there they are growing. This is their Xerophyta species. And, okay, so before I got into that, what we said is, okay, each person in the lab will have an opportunity to select one or more genes from this and test them themselves. But you've got to look after your Xerophyta plants because they are the source of this DNA. And I remember one of my students decided he was going to make a library out of cold treated, so look for cold resistance genes. Except he forgot, and the plant froze. So that was the end of that. Anyway, so from then on, we started looking for genes, and the first one we found was we called stress-associated protein, because we just didn't actually know quite what it did, because we knew it coded for a hydrophobic protein, and this is Dahlia Garvey. Dahlia is a Zimbabwean PhD, she now heads the Tobacco Research Board in Zimbabwe. They work on a lot more than just tobacco. And this was done with the Sager's sufficiency by functional sufficiency, and here when you get the gene in growing on sorbitol, it grows. Very easy, very easy. There's its hydrophobicity. You can see lots of hydrophobic sections in it, and that's our diagram of what it probably looks like in comparison with other similar genes. So that's the first one we looked at. Oh, and this is just a heat treatment. It also grows. This is the wild type looking very sick, and these are various transgenics. So it also codes for heat resistance. In fact, it probably is involved in many stresses, and this is it growing in transgenic tobacco without water. Okay, so in the lab, it does quite nice things in terms of desiccation tolerance. Jill used to be very strict with my students. Don't talk about anything in the lab as drought tolerant. Drought is an environmental thing. What you test in the lab is desiccation. So I learned along with my students from Jill that's what. Then we went on to differential screening of the, in that case, this probably is Xerophyta viscose, are the ones we picked from the draft.
Yeah.
But they're going through different taxonomic change. But Jill says it doesn't actually make much difference to which it comes from. Except you'll see that all the genes have XV as their first name, and some of them might have to be changed. So here we are, we're looking at expression, RNA expression in hydrated compared with dehydrated. So we're looking for differences. Upregulation, here's a good one. And so we decided to sequence a lot of them. And this is where Jill came in again, because we didn't know, as molecular biologists, what we should be looking for. And so she said, these are the kinds of things you should be looking for. So Jill was had a huge input in what we should be looking for. And indeed, in that case, we found many, many genes that, the ones in blue are the ones I'm going to be talking about, but you can see some of the others that various students did their PhDs on. And the first one was Shaheen Mola. She was looking at a peroxyredoxin, that's an antioxidant, and the title of her thesis could have been, it wasn't, but it could have been, this gene does not confer desiccation tolerance on transgenic plants, because not all of them will, and not all of them will be carried forward. So Shaheen had a great PhD, but we had to drop that too. Here's another peroxyredoxin. Here is Kirshni Govinda. She'll appear later in my talk. Also with a collaborator, another antioxidant, taking things from potentially damaging back to oxygen. So PRX1 codes for a 1-cis peroxyredoxin, a novel antioxidant, stress-inducible. Active site is conserved. It's located in, it functions as a protector, possibly as a protector of nucleic acid against damage from reactive oxygen species. And then the third one in this series is an aldose reductase, converts glucose to sorbitol, which is an alpha-protectant, and that was done by Alice Moreza, also from Zimbabwe. And that's what hers looks like, converting it from glucose to sorbitol. We haven't done any modeling, we're just using this as a pretty picture to tell non-scientists what it could do. Okay, and then she tested it in transgenic Arabidopsis, and the ones on the top are the controls, and you can see they're looking pretty sick, and these are the ones that are the transgenics in Arabidopsis. So conclusions at this stage: peroxyredoxins may protect transgenic plants from high light intensity. Aldose reductase protects against dehydration and osmotic stress. The signaling membrane, that's the first one, the SAP1, signaling membrane protein protects against dehydration, heat, and salinity. Now we started on the stacking exercise to see if we could put all these genes or a number of genes together and get protection, get desiccation tolerance. But we also figured that we needed an inducible promoter, because if these genes are going to be expressed all the time, it could confer some damage to metabolic load on the plants, and that you don't want. So you want the plants to be as healthy as possible. We found one. It actually turned out to come from the very first one, the XV-SAP. So this is the promoter from XV-SAP, and we linked it to luciferase and got activity under dehydration. So we now had a stress-inducible promoter to link to these various genes. But then it was a bit long. It was about a kilobase, and we really did, if you're putting genes into a transgenic plant, you want as little as possible. We couldn't cut down the genes coding for the various enzymes, but we figured we could at least cut down the gene coding for the promoter, which we duly did. And we found that the XV-SAP1 promoter is indeed stress-inducible, acted under dehydration stress, but it was too long. So we've shortened it without affecting its function, and it can be used to drive the expression of the target stress tolerance gene. Now at this stage, I haven't shown you all the other ones that we were working on. We made constructs with a number of different genes together, each on their own, which gave some sort of protection in transgenic tobacco or in transgenic Arabidopsis. I have to tell you that we don't do maize in our lab at the moment because, at that stage, because it's just too difficult. If I'd started this work and realized that maize doesn't grow in the Western Cape, I might never have started. But fortunately, I was foolish and started it. And we actually started it working with Ed Rubitsky, who unfortunately can't be here today. He was going to speak also. And Ed and I decided to work on he's a plant virologist, and we started to work on Maize Street virus resistance. And at that stage, we couldn't grow maize. We didn't even have, when I started this work, I went to see Bianke, that was now a zillion other names, in the Research Triangle Park. And I was taken around the glass house with the head of the glass house. He said, don't even think of getting into transgenic maize unless you have a computer-controlled glass house. I forbore to tell him we didn't even have a glass house. They then built a glass house, but it's in the shade of Table Mountain, so you lose the sun at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Otherwise, everything is fine. Then we did get a conviron at once. We had to get it from Canada, and in the transport it lost its door. So, but apart from that, everything's fine. But in our work with Maize Street virus, we got in touch with a seed company, Paschal, and so they were going to do all the challenges of the virus in their glass houses. And so what we would do is, when our transgenic seedlings were about that big, fortunately, Paschal has shares in the nursery Starcares. And so the directors of Starcares would come down from Paschal in their private jet for their meetings every 3-4 months, and they'd go back with all our transgenic plants in the back of the plane. I did ask the regulators, what do we do about transporting transgenic plants in the back of a jet or a small plane? And they said, can you pretend you never asked us? But I'm digressing. But the sad thing about that is when we did develop transgenic maize that was resistant to Maize Street virus, Paschal said the cost of bringing this to even field trials is too much for us to bear. We're just a small seed company, so tough. It stays in the fridge, the deep freeze. And then Paschal was taken over by Pioneer. And so Ed and I thought, now Pioneer's got a lot of money. So we went to Pioneer and he said, can you commercialize? Can you help us to commercialize, do field trials? And they said, the market for Maize Street virus is only Africa, because the virus is only found in Africa. And African farmers don't have enough money to recover the expense of going through glasshouse trials. So tough. So our Maize Street virus transgenic maize sits in the deep freeze in UCT and labs and Paschal. But there's a better story coming for this one. That's why I digressed. So we made the minimal gene construct with, and it also turned out that it was quite important in which order these genes appear. So that was also, and there's our desiccation tolerance in tobacco. So that's the wild type and transgenic, and we've taken this through to 3 or 4 generations. But how to test for drought tolerance in maize? You can't do it at UCT, and Paschal is fed up, so what can we do? So we went as a team. We've got, this is the team that is trying to get ahead with this as a potentially commercial. Between us, we're quite old. So Revel Iyer used to head up the lab, and then he did a PhD, a law degree in intellectual property. He now heads up intellectual property for CPUT, but his wife runs the lab. And so she and Suhail, who's the principal investigator, and I'm just also and so we took this proposal to the Technology Innovation Agency. And I don't recommend this to anyone. Because what Kirsty said when we applied about 3 years ago, she said, look, I don't mind, I'll be a mom for a few months until we get the money. Then I'll come back and run the lab. So 3 years later, she said, I'm actually quite tired of being a mom, you know, when's this ever going to happen? But eventually it did happen. In February we got the first check. And about 3 weeks ago we had our first lab meeting with the TIA people, and they seem to be happy. But this is only part of the story. They brought the money, but we needed a partner. You needed a local partner to do the embryo transformation, the plant work, the trials, the regulation, and eventually to market. And here entered a fantastic company called Klein Karoo Seed Production and Marketing, who are based in Oudtshoorn. And they are setting up the whole tissue culture facility. They've got the glasshouse trials, and we're working with them to see if we can possibly get drought-tolerant maize as a result of this. I'm ending off still with a question. We hope we can develop drought-tolerant maize with the help of K2, that's the Klein Karoo, that's their nickname, they call K2, and funding by TIA. But you know, the funding is really only to glasshouse trials. And as many of my colleagues have got experience with, you know, a glasshouse is just a bigger lab. And so we really have to have the field trials in order to get any idea. We have no idea if this is going to work outside the lab, but we're going to give it a shot.
Thank you very much. And I stuck to Thank you very much. So next, I would like to welcome Mr. Willem Boerters. He is from the Plant Breeding Laboratory and also recently appointed Chair of Genetics. Congratulations, Willem.
Thank you, Bianca. Thank you, everyone. I must say I feel a bit out of place in Stellenbosch between the UCT people. And I'm also going to talk about tractors, so mostly, so enjoy. I'm a plant breeder. I'm a conventional plant breeder. So I actually have a door for your conviron, by the way. And I'm outside in the field, if ever I can. So I would like to start off with this photograph because it shows the absolute dreadful year that we had last year in the Western Cape. Esvi, are you still on this photo? Okay. One of my old students is in the audience. So that is the amount of straw that we got from a 5 square meter plot, which is kind of ridiculous. We literally had some empty bags. And all of this is within the scope of us having a breeding platform looking at increasing yield. And then comes along the drought, which caused obviously severe water stress. And by the way, in my lab, you're not allowed to talk about drought tolerance. You can talk about water stress tolerance. And you can, and we breed for water stress tolerance for specific growth stages. And usually, basically, the best to explain it to people is to tie the plant over until there are sufficient water around, and then in 2017 you wait, and we're still waiting. But anyway, okay. So background to all of this is the Department of Science and Technology, together with Grain SA, after they had one of their 2014 farmers in Davos, was basically the message was we need more yield. And then unfortunately, because everyone nowadays have access to the internet, even farmers, which I sometimes do not like, you get people that get this kind of wheat yields. And this is a New Zealand farmer, and he had a wheat yield of 16.79 tons per hectare. This is verified. So then you get like a barrage of emails telling you that I get 0.5 tons and this guy's getting 16.79 tons. Where's my other 16 tons? And the problem is you're not going to get it in South Africa. Not with dry land. You're not going to get it with our irrigation wheat where you have terminal heat. But we can surely strive towards that. And internationally, that's something that's been is on the way as well. So important as well is that quality when it comes to wheat is extremely important. And there's about 26 traits that we have threshold values for when it comes to milling, for instance. And I always tell students that the millers and the bakers wants to sell us air and water, because that's way cheaper than flour. Well, it was until a few years ago anyway. So that aside, so this is the triangle, the unholy triangle that you look at when you breed any new crop, basically, biotic, abiotic, quality, yield, and obviously the physiology could have been a ring around that. But that's what we need to look at. And for a very long time in our lab, the past basically 100 years, last year, we've been focusing mostly on the biotic stresses. Now, internationally, with wheat basically being outstripped by maize 10-1 probably, and obviously we're not going to go into the fact that the one is a C3 plant and the other one is a C4 plant and have no chance at all anyway, you have a situation where yields from wheat has dropped quite dramatically if you look at the other crops. And ever since the Green Revolution, where we had the RHT genes introduced by Norman Borlaug, and basically the CIMMET team in wheat and in rice as well on that side, you've seen that there's a steady increase, but we don't see that rapid increase that we now need. So internationally, together with CIMMET, some of the more westernized countries and also Japan, they started what we refer to as the International Wheat Yield Partnership. And the idea from this is very much the same as we have in South Africa with our platform, and that's to increase basically wheat yields so that we can get farmers to be sustainable and profitable again. Now, we've heard about urbanization and so on, and I would like to introduce extensification versus intensification as well to and if you look in South Africa, specifically if you look at wheat, you will see that we have had a dramatic drop in the amount of tons that we're producing, and we are importing almost half of the wheat that we eat. And that is a problem because we have an up-and-coming middle class and they're eating mostly rice and wheat products, and they're moving away from maize, which is anyway traditionally seen as animal feed outside South Africa. So the migration and the aspiration of the middle class is towards that. So when the rand drops, we pay more. Now luckily, and I say luckily with a bit of tongue in cheek, luckily the cost of flour is a very small percentage of an actual price of bread. It's less than 30%. So basically it costs more to get the loaf of bread to you than it actually puts money back into the farmer's pocket. What you will, however, see is that the tons per hectare has increased dramatically from 36. And here you can see that wheat is actually doing quite well. Barley is doing extremely well, and the South African Barley Brewing Institute has had a lot of financial input from first SAB and now from AB InBev. They've got a cash kitty of about 600 million after they had the Competition Commission intervene. So they're spending that with great speed. But what do we do to narrow that gap to maize? Now, and I'm not going to go into this, but breeding is a very long time. And what I do, for instance, and what you guys do are basically over here on the wall. So that, although that is mostly a 12 to 20 year process, there is a whole 12 to 20 year process on this side of the wall. So how do we shorten this? Now what we do in my lab is run a wheat pre-breeding program. And we basically try to give crossing parents to the companies that's focused over here, Sensako, Pannar, and the ARC's breeding program, so that they basically can enhance their breeding efforts. And I'm going to talk a bit about the project later on when I show you some of the things that we've done, but basically within the Wheat Breeding platform, we have 7 work packages that we're looking at, with probably the most important one, the fact that we distribute material to breeding programs so that they can use it actively. And each year, and in Novus people must please cover their ears, each year I literally give all the germplasm in my lab away to those breeding programs. And each year I get a full set of data back from them. So I have a vast footprint in terms of my breeding program, in terms of data accumulation, and also the network between the breeders that we have. So it's one large multi-stakeholder collaborative project, which means, unfortunately, that some days I mostly manage people instead of a breeding project. So one of the things that we've strived for within the platform is also looking at the innovation side of things. And this is something where South African universities, especially when it comes to agriculture side, has lagged behind a bit because we didn't have the money to innovate and test out the new equipment and the new techniques available because they are so costly. Now, one of the things that the platform has enabled our lab is to take that leap. So while some of our colleagues are still planting by hand, for instance, a field, and I'll show you the type of area that we cover, we've been planting with this planter, single rows and so on, for the past couple of years. That's about 30 years old, and in comes the new technology. So what I'm going to focus on is how this technology enables us to be better at what we do, but also how this technology, where we're adapting commercial scale technology to our breeding program, is enabling us and also preparing students and staff basically to be more productive. And basically, we're jumping into and being part of the 4th industrial revolution. Now, this is a fully computer-controlled planter, and you basically need one person to drive the tractor, and hopefully in the future that will be redundant, and I'll show you just now why. And basically you would need one person at the back of the planter, and we pre-fill the cartridges, and the system runs on its own. So we have minimal input. We can plant about 6,000 to 7,000 single rows per day with this, and we can do short rows, long rows. We can do whatever we like. As long as you can program it, you can do it. Now, is there sound? We don't need the sound. So this is me doing something that you're not supposed to do. I got out of this self-driving tractor to make a clip for Twitter. It's got a center point system on it. It is a system that is within a centimeter accurate. The system costs more than the tractor. But you can go from standstill, planting within that 1 centimeter accuracy. And now the computer is frozen up. And the nice thing about the system is that we can plant perfectly straight rows so that we can do our high throughput phenotyping with our drone. And our pixel size with our drone is 2.5 centimeters. So if we don't have accuracy of more than 2.5 centimeters, we can't use the drone. So Lizanne is at the back at the moment running the planter, and you can see that I'm outside the cab. So, and it froze up again. So we're going even further with that now. We've retrofitted our track, and all of this is experimentation. So this, unfortunately, it's very vulgar to talk about money, but to give you an idea, this is a 100,000 rand experiment. So we're putting narrow tractors on there, and tires, and the tires are 220 centimeters wide. So they are going to fit in between my 27.5 centimeter rows. So now basically I have one guy with a bulk sprayer that we've retrofitted so that we can do single plots, and each of these work on a separate electronic gate or valve then, and we can control the flow and everything from the cab. Previously we either did with knapsack sprayers or a guy on a quad. Now you do it in a tractor with an air-conditioned cabin, and the tractor self-drives. So the tractor keeps within the rows. So we basically do what we've previously done in 2 to 3 hours, which previously took us 10 to 14 days to run through. And it's really, really efficient, and you get way better results. But technology is in the eye of the beholder, because I also got this photograph from one of my CIMMIT colleagues, where CIMMIT is now actively also involved in mechanization, where they only looked at germplasm distribution. And surely for this person, this is revolutionary, because she can plant, and she can plant quite a lot. And one of the things that's driving the distribution of this technology in Africa is cell phones. And in many cases, some of the people that's running this type of operations are doing this for money, and they basically have almost an Uber system. So just to show you, and many of you would have seen the crop circles perhaps, if we can program it, we can plant it. So I programmed that on my cell phone while in the field. I dragged it onto the screen of the Trimble system, and we planted that. And that's the installation that was done by, and part of the university's, the agricultural faculty's 100-year celebrations, and Strydom van der Merwe, together with us, is responsible for this. And recently, now that the canola is done, you can see the wheat drying off at the back. So this is what you could do with the type of precision plant equipment that we have. This is basically the type of size of the scope in the field that we do, and we do this with a core team of non-students, not the students included, of basically 4 people. And we can do this because of the level of mechanization that we have within the program. And this is also essential if you look at urban farming, that you bring in the technology and everything that goes with that. One of the things that works really well is using drone technology. We've been using a Iris drone with a flat-lensed GoPro on it. We've recently switched over to a fixed wing. We've crashed it a bit, but luckily it's very inexpensive to fix. And then we have a multi-spectrum camera on there. This is the type of photographs that we start out with. This is just one photograph, but typically with fields like this will be 70 to 100 photographs of 20 megs plus that you stitch together, and you can do 3-dimensional walkthrough. You can extract data from it. So basically for us, it's a phenotyping exercise. And what it does is it kind of neutralizes the field, or make the field more even, because previously as a plant breeder, it was me, person with a clipboard, versus a sequencing machine, which is kind of a very unfair fight if you look at it. So this is helping us really a lot. The other thing that's helping us a lot is this box that's on the new harvester that we've recently bought. This thing basically weighs the plots, takes moisture, and it also takes hectoliter mass, and by the time that you dock the harvester to the Wi-Fi, it extracts all your information. So we can do a lot more, we can do it quicker, and we can do it more accurate, which is really, really important. Because what do you do when you do this type of breeding? You basically play the genetic lotto to a large extent as well. But sometimes we also buy stuff that really makes the technical assistants very happy. And this is one of those things. It is a reaper binder machine. And previously they used to cut 6,000 to 7,000 single rows with a sickle. And if you haven't done that before, then you won't appreciate that machine. But it really helps us in terms of our efficiency. So we do all of this. We stack genes. We distribute material. And if we do it right, then this is the type of effect that we can establish. This, for instance, are 4 of the resistance genes that we've been working on for quite some time. They are novel, they are new, they are our pride and joy. And here you can see the resistant parent. They are put in a Chinese spring background, which is common to what we do. Here you can see the susceptible reaction with leaf rust. There again leaf rust, and there you can see leaf rust. So I kind of laugh usually when people moan about GMOs, because this is the type of crosses that we do. This is something that you've all walked over. This is something that you've all played with, or horlosiegras. And this is something that has given all of you hay fever in the past. And we make crosses with this and transfer the genes that we would like to. It's considered tertiary gene pool crosses, so they are quite difficult to perform, and you usually have to do a bridge cross. This is the type of field effect that you then get, very high pressure. You can see the trace reactions, but the plants are quite clean and free from rust. Now, just bringing it in, also we do a lot of growth chamber work, and here are aspects that directly relates to urban farming and doing small-scale farming. We do a growth house complex where we have a centralized nutrient solution system that we make up centrally, and we pump throughout the whole glasshouse complex. It actually works quite well, and we get quite sufficient plant growth. Then for our crosses, we clip the tillers and we keep them again in a nutrient solution for about 6 weeks, where they flower and they actually produce seeds. Now, the conditions have to be perfect, and recently the faculty has been so great to fund us a new growth chamber complex, and we have our own LED lighting systems in there, which is really nice because we can manipulate everything that we would like, except for CO2. And here you can see the product where there's tillers with seed in it maturing. Now, I'm almost at the end, Bianke. We've also been at a field visit a few months ago in the UK, and we were at the James Hutton Institute, and they are building basically the ultimate playground for a person like me. They are building a vertical farm together with a commercial partner. They're spending 40 million pounds on it. They are distraught because it's only 40 million. And this is what they've ended up with. Now, they're a bit behind schedule when we visited, so this is a newspaper photograph. But I'm going to show you the clip and look at the automation and what they actually are doing. So half of it is for research purposes, and the other half would be for the commercial partner. So this is just the initial showing you the proof of concept, but you can see everything is automated. There's also robots in there. They zap the weeds with lasers, with software that can basically identify what you don't want in there. So that robot is weeding it. I need to get me one of those. There's the lasers. And they have basically 2/5 of the system up and running what they wanted initially. The system as it stands at the moment are apparently carbon neutral, and they even put energy back into the grid over the summer months because of the amount of solar panels that they have. By the way, it's a lovely place to visit. They basically research how to make whiskey. So, yeah. And I think they need postdocs almost constantly. So, yeah. And there you can see the vertical farming. There are guys that making LED lighting that are quite famous. That's also helping them. That's the Helios guys. They also are for the speed breeding. I'm not going to go into the apps so much, just to show you that there are free software out there that you can use. And then I would like to end off with this, looking at apps and the future of all of this, helping you to farm, do even your vegetable garden. We've been interested in this type of thing for quite a while, and I've told one of the colleagues before, and I've always thought that spending money on equipment is expensive, but we had some programming done the past couple of years with some of the work that we're doing, and that was really expensive, but also worthwhile. And then I would like to end off with one of my ex-students that started a small company, and SVS in the audience as well. So basically applying what he's learned throughout his agricultural degree, not in our lab, but his degree in total. And I think that's the type of situation or initiative that's going to drive forward this into the future. So thank you for listening, and thank you for all the colleagues and everyone throughout the years, and also the team back at the lab that makes all of this possible.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to see all the new technologies coming up and definitely how we could be using that. So next I would like to welcome Professor Joel Farrant. Okay. And I wanted to mention when Professor Thomson was giving her talk that we've got 2 L'Oreal UNESCO Women in Science awardees here. So I think we are quite privileged to actually hear about all the research that you have been doing.
Thank you, Bianke.
And still ongoing.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Hi, everyone. And I'm very grateful to be part of this audience. I love the title of the workshop, Climate Smart Agriculture, very passionate to my heart. When Bianke invited me to give this talk, I had just published this paper. It was an invited review with Ian Kilhorst, who's a person you can hear a lot about in, of course, my talk. If I can get the, where's the pointer? Sorry, I should have worked this out beforehand. That little one. Okay, so thank you, Henk Kilhorst. And I thought, great, I could just talk about what we wrote in this review. And when it actually came to writing my talk, I decided to do it very differently for a number of reasons. When you're writing a review on what is out there in the published literature, it's quite a depressing scenario. People who have taken genes associated with desiccation tolerance, certainly what they've published, they've probably got good things up their sleeve that they haven't published. And desiccation tolerance, I'd like to give you the definition, is the ability to tolerate 95% of your water loss without prolonged periods of time without loss of viability. It is rare. Only 135 species of plants in the world can actually do that in their vegetative tissues. So when people have taken genes associated with desiccation tolerance, usually 1 or 2 or placenta 3, and put them into a crop, there has been a report of increased resilience to water loss, but not necessarily increased tolerance of water loss. There's our yield penalties, and finally, when you finally get these things out into the field, plants are crazy little buggers, put them into a multi-stress environment, they often do opposite things of what you're showing in the lab. So what I thought I was going to do is tell you some of my more wild and wacky ideas, no proof of concept yet, but I'm presenting some of my latest research about how I can, having understood quite comprehensively what it takes to be desiccation tolerant, to perhaps make a climate smart crop. So on a workshop concentrating on climate smart agriculture, I thought there would be quite a lot of reference to what does climate change mean. And I wanted to show particularly this slide, because this is taken from a study by Danie, published in Nature Climate, where he looked at the effect of climate change on drought. Now, as Bianke mentioned, drought is the worst threat to agriculture in the world, but it's going to get worse due to climate change. What you're seeing here is all the areas that you're in red are areas that until recently have been quite successfully used for agriculture, but no longer possible because of lack of sufficient rainfall under high temperature conditions. In 2050, this is what he predicts it's going to look like. And we in Africa, well, South Africa, we're in trouble. Well, most of the world is in trouble, but my heart is for Africa. The bulk of agriculture in Africa is still rain-fed. There's not a lot of money for irrigation, if you can get irrigation. There's very little money for expensive technologies mentioned by Danie in the audience. Most of the rural people, they're declining in numbers, earn less than $1 a day across Africa. So what we really need is some more drought-tolerant crops. But drought, as Jennifer suggested, is a meteorological term. It's what the plants experience and how they respond. 99.9% of the time, they'll either avoid or resist or escape water loss. If you dry them, if you actually physically get them below a critical water content, they die. And so what I'm saying with understanding of desiccation tolerance is, can we breed crops that are more tolerant of water deficit? Because that way we can actually get them through a drought without them dying. Now this is not so easy, because nothing but a resurrection plant is shown up there in here in a dry state, one of the ones I work on, or seed and possibly pollen, but I work on seeds and resurrection plants, can tolerate loss of more than 0.3 megapascals of water deficit stress. So what I'm showing here is stresses associated with water loss from a fully hydrated plant all the way down to 0.08 grams of water or minus 150 megapascals. So only a resurrection plant and a seed can survive these lower water contents. And if you want to look at what that means in terms of total water content, and here I'm referring to this axis where we're looking at percentage water that the plant has, drying down, this is a drying curve, over time, if you just stop watering them, that's what happens. They can lose between 10 and at most 55% of their water, and that depends on the species. The reality is that none of them can actually cope with the stresses associated with loss below 20.25 grams per gram, 2.45 grams per gram. And one of the things that exacerbates this, particularly in crops, is that there's a stress called photosynthetic ROS production, and because photosynthesis is such a high energy and such an essential metabolism in plants, it's very disruptive. It causes a lot of free radical stress. And what that does is exacerbate all of these downstream stresses, and in fact induces drought-induced senescence, which is something I'm going to talk about at the end of my talk. Now, just to give some of my credentials as to why I can talk quite knowledgeably, I guess, about lots of things, is that I call myself a systems biologist. I work on desiccation tolerant, resurrection plant, vegetative tissues, because they are desiccation tolerant. I work on seeds, they're desiccation tolerant. I work on desiccation sensitive seeds and on crops. And I follow what happens during drying and rehydration, using a whole lot of different techniques, ranging from analysis of cell anatomy and ultrastructure. We do all the omics, so we can do some following up what's happening, not just is we look at the transcript, but are those proteins being expressed, are they making metabolites? And recently I've just entered the field of genomics, thanks to a collaboration with the guy I just mentioned before, Xerophyta, and we've sequenced the genomes of 2 resurrection plants, a third in the pipeline, we've published 1. That has helped us a lot in understanding genetic regulation. We use functional, biochemical, and physiological and biophysical studies now to see what the functional protectants are. And I've always felt that having got a more comprehensive understanding of desiccation tolerance, I can make a more meaningful suggestion about what to use to make a drought-tolerant crop. And sadly, it's not going to be just 1 or 2 genes. I believe that it's a field we're about to enter into. We have to be able to manipulate multiple genes, both induce and up and down regulate, in order to achieve a real resurrection phenotype, if that's what we're aiming for. I also work on multiple resurrection plants, not just one species, because although there are similarities in desiccation tolerance, and I'll point this out now, that they all use, there's also considerable differences in how they deal with the specific stresses. The common endpoint is desiccation tolerance, but they might do things slightly differently. So I have, for a number of varied reasons, these 3 species covered in red now, all Xerophyta species, all 3 C3 monocots, are my model for making drought-tolerant cereals. Phylogenetically, they're close to cereals. This little species, Eroglossus nesbensis, is a C4 grass, close relative to an orphan crop called Eroglossus teff, which we're trying to make slightly more drought-tolerant. And then Cractrostigma wilmsii, and I work on a number of Cractrostigma species, is my model for making drought-tolerant legumes. As we've heard earlier, legumes have a high source of protein you're going to get at the basal plant level. And if we can make lots of protein in plants, we can feed more people with protein than they can afford if they have to go all the way to the north. And we're working with the orphan crop I'm working with here is Bambara, Vigna subterranean. Now, my system studies have shown that there's a remarkable similarity in the mechanisms used in the genetics underlying it between what resurrection plants do in their leaves and what seeds do when they dry out. So I asked the question, are resurrection plants turning on seed-related genes in their roots and leaves? And the answer, and I'm not going to give you the proof of all of this, I've published it quite widely, is yes, they do. This particular paper we brought out beginning of this, end of last year, on the genome of one of the resurrection plants shows this quite clearly. And not only myself, but recently Bob van Buren, who's worked on the resurrection grass Xerophyta, has shown that there is a strong seed signature in genes expressed in roots and leaves of resurrection plants. Now, what is the implication of this? Well, to go with the little cartoon, If we assume that all the genes associated with desiccation tolerance are sitting on this chromosome below the off switch, as seeds become desiccation tolerant, they switch these genes on or off as required. Resurrection plants do the exact same things in their roots and the leaves, but now crops don't. So they have the genetic potential because they make desiccation tolerant seeds, but those are permanently silenced in leaf tissues of resurrection plants. And if we can understand, and we're beginning to, and we're thinking that ADI3 regulon is very much involved in this, learn how to switch those genes on, because resurrection plants do it, can we, by doing that through CRISPR-Cas, get a desiccation tolerant seed? That's one idea. Here's another idea, and it's most of this is relatively unpublished. I'm going to skip over across a bit of data because I didn't realize you were live streaming. But this is taken from a study on senescence, or lack of senescence in resurrection plants, done by Brink, also a collaborator of mine from Queensland University of Technology. But he did this on his own, and what he showed, what he's saying here, is that drought-induced senescence happens because photosynthesis continues in crops. Resurrection plants can turn that off. But it continues and it causes all those damages I was talking about earlier. If there's an induction of apoptosis, cell death, and plants die. Resurrection plants, the bulk of those tissues, can actually stop that senescence anti-death process. And I've looked at 4 different species now, including the Brink's one. There's a number of things that they do. Brink was particularly began to show in Triplogon that there's an induction of autophagy. But most of the, as I say, 3 other species I've looked at, that's an important but one of many components required. One of the most important is to be able to switch off photosynthesis entirely. Autophagy is interesting though, because it's a process where toxins which accumulate due to water loss can actually take and be broken down and recycle as nutrients for plant protection. An important one too is this, and robust antioxidant potential, as Jennifer's pointed out, is absolutely essential. Redirection of energy reserves. This is an important one because most plants, if you put, certainly crops, if you put them under a drought stress, they will have early flowering, and that's an escape phenomenon. If I can actually produce a desiccation tolerant seed that will survive the drought, I can die off, but my species will survive. So early flowering is common in plants, in desiccation sensitive plants. What resurrection plants do is that they stop that early flowering in drought and they induce it after rehydration. So one of the good things about this strategy, if we can get the phenotype going in a crop, is that after drought, if there's a rain, you will always get seed set. Might not be fantastic, but you will get seed set. And I'm going to show you at the end of our talk, if I've got time, a little video that will confirm what I'm saying now. But what I want to show you next is a study, unpublished data from a student of mine, Astrid Rademacher. She's a PhD student, looking at what we call Xerophyta schlechteri. This is the one that used to be called viscosa. I'm going with the accurate names here. But as I said, the bulk of resurrection plant tissues will survive senescence. However, there's always the oldest tissues do senesce during drying. So in this particular plant, the oldest tissue is the leaf tip. And if you look here, every time the plant dries down, it senesces. There's a mid-zone here, which is purple during drying. And that is going to be the next little bit of tissue that sacrifices in the next cycle of drying. And most of the plant remains non-senescent. So what Astrid did is did an extensive RNA-seq analysis of all those 3 tissue zones across dehydration and recovery in Xerophyta schlechteri. And I know it's a really complex graph, but I'll talk it through quite briefly. What she did is did k-means clustering of genes which actually showed similar trends in the 3 zones. So each of these zones, this is the non-senescent tissue, the transition zone, and the senescent tissue. And what she's done is superclusters which show similar trends of many, many genes, and I hope you can't really see the numbers there, but many genes which say the same trends in each of those zones during dehydration, which is shown very small here, and then on rehydration. And what she was able to show is that there's a whole lot of trends here, genes that are upregulated or downregulated during what I call the mid-response to drying. That's below 50% water content, only a resurrection plant can survive, and definitely not a crop. And typically resurrection plants also have this late response. There are recovery genes, there are genes that don't really change much, but interestingly, at least 4 clusters which are associated with that senescence phenomenon at the tip. She then went on and did network analysis to see how the expression of these genes correlate with each other. And what she's done here is color code all what we call these ones, all the pro-life genes. It's a bit of a politically incorrect statement, but they happen in tissues that don't die. And all of these are, the network analysis is shown here. All of those genes associated with senescence cluster very nicely, a lot of correlation between the expression into two clusters. And if you go and zoom in close here, there's one gene that connects the pro-life situation to pro-death. And I'm calling it the anti-death gene. It either stops senescence in the bulk of the tissue or it promotes senescence in the senescent tissue. And we have got proof about what this is about. I'm going to skip over those slides because it actually involves a colleague, a master student working in a different lab. But suffice to say that what we found and what we did here was we went to Arabidopsis. It's the quickest, easiest system to see what the hell this gene is doing. And we got knockout mutants of the homologs that are as close as possible to this gene. And we found that in the gene is knocked down, TD line knocked down, there's an early flowering phenotype and a senescence phenotype. Conversely, if you overexpress it, there's a suppression of flowering and a suppression of senescence. So this we seem to take further into proof of concept. But essentially, if this is possible, and it can go as simple as that, regulating just one or two, or one gene that will regulate the whole downstream cluster of genes could be successful in the future. So I've got time just for my video. Okay, I'm going to show you a video, and I'm eccentric, so I put it to music because there's a theme that goes through my talk, work it out from the music. But what you're going to see is time-lapse photography of 3 different resurrection plants after I've given them water, and they've been kept dry for 6 months, so they've actually had 5% water for 6 months before they receive the water. There's an axis at the bottom to show you how quickly this happens. Just skip through these quickly. Oops. There we go. No. There we go. So one day it's already green, but by day 3 it flowers. In this species it resurrects very quickly. 12 hours. Oh, the small things that they can learn in our plants, difficult to see. This is one of the diatoms, legumes, even the flowers after dry. The take-home message is if we can get this phenotype into crops, we can get them flowering immediately after water loss, after a drought. Maybe we can still get seeds in, maybe we can. With that, I just need to acknowledge all the funding that helped me get through a lot of this research. I hold a PhD in on a Sergeant Chair, and I've had quite a lot of luck in various funding. But more importantly, many students and collaborators over the last 25 years of my research. My plants and I thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, lastly, I'm going to invite up a duo presentation. Joubert and Brandon Paschal from Innovus and Launch Lab at Stellenbosch University.
We each have about 30 minutes, is that okay?
No.
Do you have a clapping fan?
So just before you guys start, I would, on behalf of Professor Ed Grabisky, like to apologize. He really wanted to be here, so for any of you who is now very upset that he couldn't make it, he actually had to attend a BRICS conference or BRICS meeting in Russia, which is a matter of national priority, so I believe we can all respect the importance of that for the country. Okay, and with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. So, while I'm not going to speak directly on climate-smart agriculture, the idea is to show how Innovus helps the students and staff of the university in terms of bringing their innovations to market or commercializing their innovations. And I know there are some of you in the audience that are not necessarily from this university, but there are offices of technology transfer at all universities in South Africa. worldwide, at most universities, you'll find somebody fulfilling this kind of role. Although not everyone in the same way necessarily. So there's a lot of text on what Universe does, but essentially we are responsible for commercializing the university's assets. I specifically work in the technology commercialization team, and that focuses on commercializing all intellectual property and innovations coming from the university. So I'm just going to skip over that slide. So the idea, or what we would like to achieve as the technology commercialization group in university, is to make the innovation that comes from the university matter, to assist our inventors in creating an impact based on working from the innovation. And we do this by providing a couple of services. So we provide intellectual property protection and management, we provide advice, we help with entrepreneurial development and support, and one of the things is the Launch Lab, and Brandon will tell you more about that. We like creating spin-out companies, and I'll tell you a bit later more on why we do that. So just to show a bit of the impact, this is specifically in terms of our group of companies. So there's, I think, roughly 23 companies at the moment. They last year had a combined turnover of 226 million rand, which, if you consider that as early stage startups, is actually quite impressive. They employ 267 people, so that's, for us, is a quite important statistic. We are taking knowledge created in South Africa and leveraging that to create jobs and value in South Africa, but obviously working globally. So the vision is to create knowledge regions, and what we mean by this is the following. The university or group of university is an innovation engine. There's continual research being done, there's continual innovation coming out of that. And what we would like to do is from that form a critical mass of spin-out companies, and those can come from the university, but what we're seeing in our environment is also some people coming from outside the university and forming part of this network. And that will attract entrepreneurs, so this is what we're starting to see, which will attract venture capitalists, angel investors, so the money that you need in your commercialization journey. And in the end should attract multinational companies or large companies to the area as well, forming this knowledge region. Now the knowledge region can be a knowledge region on climate smart agriculture. It's not necessarily only one knowledge region that we're talking about. And there's a lot of things about the importance of innovation and stimulating the economy and so forth. But important for me is this part here. That universities in Africa can play a significant role in stimulating growth, which I think is really important. So, the process that we use to assist, I'm quickly going to talk to the process that we use to assist our entrepreneurs. Well, actually, before I do that, just in terms of impact. So I showed you the numbers now, the business numbers. But one of our companies, which I think you might find kind of interesting, although not necessarily a climate smart agriculture company, is one that looks at the water footprint of businesses, of schools and so forth. It's a company called Brink, and they have a water monitoring platform. And they currently have a project with a couple of schools dealing throughout the Western Cape. I think it's around about 200, I'm not exactly 342. They have corporate sponsors on board as well. But the interesting thing is I just checked their dashboard before I came up here, and they saved yesterday 1.4 million litres of water. And during the entire length of the project so far, I don't want to lie to you, but it's more than 200 million litres of water already. So that's the impact that we can have leveraging the innovations that come out of our universities. Okay, so if you work with Innovis, we have a standard process to kind of give you an idea of what to expect. There's an invention disclosure form that we ask our researchers or inventors to fill out. We then help with looking at whether the invention is protectable, whether that can be through patents or copyright or registered designs or trademarks or whatever other form of protection that is possible. Grant leaders' rights, obviously. This is one of the ways that we can protect. But also we help with looking at those things that I think Danie mentioned in terms of the business model. How can we make this work? How can we take it and create a sustainable business out of this? We commercialize primarily using two different modes. One is licensing. So if you have some sort of protectable innovation, we go out, help assist you in looking for partners that will be willing to take a license on that technology and take it to market. The other mode of commercialization that we use is spin-out companies. I mentioned this. So in terms of spin-out companies, we assist again with quite a lot of things. We can help with IP protection, forming the entity. We help with the legal cost. And something I should mention is that Innovus carries all of the costs associated with this. Business case development, helping you write business plans, helping to take the pain out of TR applications, we assist with that as well. Negotiating legal agreements, and all of the things that you need to actually start a company. And more than that, we also incubate our spin-out companies, and the launch lab, all our spin-out companies goes into the launch lab for a year of free incubation. And Brandon will tell you more about what they do, but that is an awesome service as well. In terms of licensing, we help with, like I said, the patenting, but also doing the license agreements, monitoring the license agreements, and so forth. Yeah, the Launch Lab program. So that is, in short, I think we have not a lot of time, but if you want more information, you're more than welcome to contact me. If you have an idea, please give me a call, send me an email, or just walk over to our offices at 15 De Beer Street. Let us have a chat and see how we can take your invention or your innovation to market, how we can assist you. Another thing that I would just like to mention, we have weekly monthly idea pitching competition as well, or session, not a competition, at the end of every month, where all our students are invited to if they have an idea, to pitch it to us. It doesn't necessarily have to be university IP, and we see how we can assist them and how we can become involved. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. It's not often I find I'm the least qualified person in a room. I just have a master's degree. Shame. I'm also from North Carolina. I think you were mentioning connections from Charlotte, which is the capital of the city, not the save the world kind of city like the Raleigh-Durham area. I'm also the least educated, maybe, or qualified, and I'm the probably most capitalist person, which I don't know if there's a correlation there. Someone might have a graph that shows what that is. I'm going to fast forward and get to a punchline. I'll get back to that obligatory graph because I am talking to academics. But what we find in the launch lab, and the Bridget story is actually a really interesting one, and what we often find working with mostly academics and research people, and I'm talking to the CSIR in December about this, is that you have a great plan, and Mike Tyson says, and he's very quotable, very knowledgeable on at least what he's talking about here, everybody got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, and usually that's what happens with a technology or a product or whatever. We have a plan, we have a use for what this is going to be, and then it hits people. And people are fickle, and people are emotional, and you get figuratively punched in the mouth by the market. And Danie, you had slides talking about there's a market, there's a business model, and people are emotional. What you may like about a lot of the work that you're doing is that data is not emotional. Labs, there's very little emotion in the lab, but people are fickle and emotional beings, and they have context happening around them, and unreasonable affinity for things that you have to navigate as an entrepreneur, or if you're going to take your technology or product into a market. And I think it was a dependency that Prof. Brink, you were talking about, that these are unknowns. We have this interesting stuff, but then we have this dependency on things that we cannot control in a lab. And the launch lab, maybe that's the wrong name for the launch lab, because we can't control things. Also, what often tends to happen is, yes, you get punched in the mouth. South Park, anyone remember the South Park cartoon? So there's this group of gnomes, and they collect underpants, and they sing the song, work all night, search for underpants. And then the kids follow them into their lair, and they're like, what are you doing with all these underpants? And they lay out the big plan, we're going to collect underpants, we're going to do stuff, and then we're going to have a profit. And that's also typically what we see with researchers and technology people, even non-postdocs and non-PhDs or master's students. They're product focused. They're going to build something, miracles happen, and then they're going to have a sustainable business. And what we help researchers from the university and spin-off companies do is figure out some of this. And I'm really kind of chopping up my talk to try to squeeze it into 5 minutes. Value proposition and business model design. And what that means is, I'll give you a quick, maybe a case study with Bridget. Timmis Boyson was the researcher and inventor of the technology of Bridget, bridging IoT, taking non-data things and trying to stick a device on it to make it create data that we can learn things from. And he was going to sell it to you and me and stick it on our geysers in our houses. We were going to pay 2,000 Rand for this device, stick it on our geyser, and pay whatever it is for the plumber to stick it on there, and then pay them a 100 Rand a month subscription fee so that we could save 150 Rand a month in water or electricity usage. And you're laughing, and maybe it was the tone of what I was saying that caused you to laugh, where it could have also been 50 Rand a month. It's going to take me, you can do the math, however many months of that to pay it back. And then that means I'm going to be out of the office for half of a day, and the admin of calling the plumber it's just not worth the effort. And if he had stayed with his original plan of selling it to you and me, nothing would be happening. But he didn't stick with that. He got out into the market, interacted with emotional beings that aren't, it's 50 Rand a month, numbers, it's just effort. And then he figured out, he was having a random coffee sharing his concerns and problems with the business with happened to be the headmaster or someone administrative in Stellenbosch High School, and I may be butchering the story. I don't know if all of those facts, it could be a different high school in Stellenbosch. I think it was Stellenbosch High. And he's like, oh, well that's fascinating. Let's take it on one of our geezers in the school and see what we can do. And on average, they're saving a school, one school, 40 to 50,000 Rand per month on their electricity and water usage. That's a salary, or 2 in some schools. They've saved the collection of schools, and they add a couple of dozen a month, 18 million Rand of cash amongst those schools this year. Never mind the water saving, which is the, yes, that's important, 18 million Rand. How many teachers can we pay with that? How many more kids can we educate with that? So yes, let's make money, let's save money, but also there's massive impact coming from that. And what we found there too, and this, Bridget, is a great case study. I'm glad you reminded me of that case study. Is, let me get back to this, and here's my obligatory graph because you're academics. This Global Entrepreneurship Development Institute, the guy's name is Zoltan Axe. Look him up, and the website is there, thegedi.org tool. And I always like to compare the countries with the US because it shows the chasm. It doesn't look as wide when you compare to the Netherlands or France or the UK. It's just the US is so out there. And I like to kind of show the difference in gap we need to climb. But all of these things I've circled in green are where South Africa is kicking ass. We are really, really good at innovation. We think there's a great opportunity compared to the rest of Africa. We are happy to accept risk. The culture supports it, the opportunity is huge. Competition that drives us to do more and do better. UCT and Stellenbosch, it's co-opetition or collaboration because there's a lot of cross stuff. You're doing work there. We drive each other to do more and do awesome. And the amount of innovation that's coming out of here is amazing. But what we are shocking at is startup skills and risk capital. And startup skills is that how do I deal with the emotional, the fickle, the illogical side of people? Why do I support Manchester United? I don't know. I bought a pair of shorts 16 years ago, not knowing what logo was on it. I'm like, oh, that's a cool team, and now I support Man United. That is illogical. Manchester, I went there last year for a pilgrimage to Old Trafford because I'm a supporter. Manchester is not a nice city. And it was a long train ride from London, and I got back to London with my wife. I'm like, we will never do that again. We just had to do it one time. If I ever watch them again, it's going to be against Tottenham in London or something like that. It is illogical. I cannot shake that support because we are emotional and affectionate beings. That startup skills is how do you engage with people and that? And it's not scientific. We apply the scientific method to that, so the value proposition and business model design is applying the method you know, but how that engages with emotional and fickle beings that are illogical on why they would want to use your technology or buy your product. And then the risk capital. So we help spin-out companies and other entrepreneurs. Only 50% of the companies we work with are university spin-outs or students. The rest of them are all the other entrepreneurs that come to the area, and we bridge the gap in the startup skills, how to engage with that. I have a business science degree in industrial psychology and an MBA, and it's that kind of softer thing of how you sell stuff. And then people that have the money, the risk capital and the networks that help you scale that and help you create the impact it needs to, they're also those fickle, illogical beings that look at you and decide if they like you or not. And then they'll give you 5 million rand. So we help bridge those two gaps at the Launch Lab primary. These other gaps we can't really do, but those two we can. I'm not going to get into that. If you want to know about being an artist, which you must be, tennis, I'm going to get into it in 30 seconds. Tennis is an artist in his field of engineering and clean technology and however all of that comes together. He is amazing at that. He realized he was not a leader in the business world, and he said, Anita, find me a CEO, because I am not the right person. It was an amazing move by him to step back, because usually we're the most clever in our field, we should be the CEO. No, you should not be the CEO, usually. 90% of you should not be the CEO, you should be the CTO. And they appointed the founder and ex-CEO of Always On, the Wi-Fi network. You've probably seen it pop up at an airport. He's now the CEO, and now they're flying and actually making money and commercializing this technology and having it make the impact that it is. And thank you.
Just try and put all the lights on. There we go. Oh, thank you. I thought I'd press something clever there. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. Maybe everyone just wants to stand up to stretch the legs a little bit. I understand sitting can be quite draining sometimes. Yes, you can stretch out, and we are going to have some open discussions, so everyone is welcome to pose questions in general. If the speakers want to, please come and relax on the couch. If you have a specific question for someone, you can say so. Otherwise, I think anybody can address it. This is not specifically for the audience to just ask a question to one of the speakers. This can also be audience to audience, speaker to speaker. So the idea is to have a generalized discussion around everything that we have just learned. We have seen quite interesting and advanced technologies being used in agriculture currently. We have seen very interesting genetically modified organisms, plants, all of the focus on agriculture. We have an inkling now of how to get entrepreneurship with some of our ideas. We understand the concept of organization, so please, I would absolutely enjoy it if you guys could discuss and pose some questions. Anybody? Please.
Sorry, I don't really like remember the names, but I think the prof will present on vertical agriculture, like doing agriculture on buildings and the rest. So I have a question with that. I was just thinking like, if you're planting like, let's say you begin to plant most of the tropical crops in buildings, and we know that this crop produces a lot of flowers, pollen that attracts insects. How do you deal with the insect and pest control in the same buildings that people are living?
Well, exactly. This is why I said we mustn't just sort of run away with the idea of urban farming and vertical farming and rooftop farming. As I said, the concept are not fully designed and integrated. I mean, you can put the tires up on the roof, you can fill it with soil, you can make sure that your fertilizer, and you can choose crops that will sell on the street right below the building. But this is how far we've got. It's not nearly fully balanced ecosystems. That also, this is why I say you have to map it on the economy, on the lifestyle, and on the ecology. And we're far from it. And my big question is, if we think about urbanization in Africa, is that where we should go, with urban agriculture, onto rooftops? Right. The question is also how to get there is with a lift, yes. But is that the place to be in African cities? If we say we want to develop concepts, technologies to support it, and markets to absorb it, is that where we should go? And this is why I was highlighting the contrast between an modern urban environment in a low-income country vis-a-vis a high-income country. It's not the same solutions. And we're testing a lot of new concepts, but lo and behold, if we don't try things, if we don't think new about things, in these cities, no one has designed them. It's just people's habits, that they just plop there. It's unpredicted, and it's unresolved, and it's underfunded. And we must find solutions. And strangely enough, the people from the urban areas are not going to dream out solutions for the cities. It's the people that live in the cities, rich or poor. They will have to come up with solutions. And the fortunate thing is that urban agriculture comes from a real conventional core on the right, and is going literally into the blue sky scrapers on the left. And we must look for balance, that is profitable and sustainable in between. So I can't answer your question. And this is why you will often see the first generation of crops are the simple ones. They don't have to flower, they don't have to seed, is the greens. They just go through a very quick life cycle and sell in and around you. Even their shelf life is very short, and you have to get them to market really close. So I'm actually questioning, the idea, but I also realize, the complexity that supplying the cities with surplus foods from the rural areas is part of the solution, but the city life is taking on its own dynamics. But take, for example, the African cities. They're importing, the African cities are importing the food through the harbors from the first world countries at high cost. And the simple reason is there's no connectivity in terms of logistics, communication, and information with their own rural areas, just 500 kilometers inland. But they'll bring food from rice from China or India over 5,000 kilometers at a ridiculously high cost. But if you analyze the market, it will say to you there's no information, there's no communication, and there's no logistics. So that's why the cities are doing it, but they're isolating themselves from their very own countries. So it's a very interesting problem. But at least you can imagine that people will get hay fever, and that's your scientific background and your social awareness that is raising those issues. And I promise you, the next vote that the group of residencies is to please stop the farming of the rooftop. And there's the end of your project, and who's going to pay back the capital that you put in there? So, interesting questions.
Yeah, Yeah, but that is actually a very important question. How are we going to deal with pests in terms of urban agriculture, rooftop farming? That is definitely something that one should be thinking about, because if you are growing a crop, you probably can't exactly grow herbicide and pesticide all over the city. It's going to cause some sort of diseases. But we also cannot necessarily only focus on organic farming, because we need sustenance, we need food, we need a way to grow food in the city.
To me, what I thought, just sort of working through the presentation, is in the first phase of this new lifestyle in cities, is not about the money. It's about people's awareness of a balanced lifestyle and a balanced ecology and a balanced urban ecosystem. Probably it will unlock more value through that than putting money into someone's pocket, or there won't even be shareholders. You can see those businesses are so small, they will probably sustain 1 or 2 families living in that block of flats. But it can create a completely different awareness on what is a balanced ecosystem that includes insects in the city, but it goes way beyond that. And I think that people's awareness, because if you often see the drop in quality of life, people go there with an expectation of a new life, and probably coming from a rural area, even moving from poverty to poverty, you will see their quality of life deteriorate in the cities. And maybe, urban farming can bring a movement about where people take responsibility, becomes inquisitive, innovative, and change urban lifestyles. And it should not only be about the profit incentive. This is why I said there's 3 components, and if you can address any part of them, you're already improving urban life.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Sorry, I'm not from botany background, but my question is that Cape Town and this area has access to the seawater. And there was a figure where it was showing in one of the presentation that by 2050 there would be an increase in the drought conditions. There would be a crest of water, more severe. So in that case, would it be wise to actually think about a desalination plant, introduction in this continent, which can actually remove the salinity of the seawater, make it more for the use of irrigation or for drinking or for all the uses? Because I know China has some of these very technologically advanced desalination plants, and they were there. So I just the idea and the suggestion.
Desalination is used quite widely. The Israelis do it effectively, the Saudis do it very effectively. It's expensive. And at the moment there are plants being built in Cape Town, but they're mostly for human use, not for agriculture. We're not going to be able to make enough water to deal with the drought crisis that we're facing right now.
To me, one of the things about climate change is not, I don't think we must be careful to make scaremongering, even a visual image such as that. We must also not underestimate our ability to adjust technologies, lifestyles, even genotypes with that sort of changed environment. If you've seen what we've done in the recent past, what we've achieved, why won't we be able to cope technologically wise, including biotechnology wise with the future? But I also don't think that must make us complacent. For example, if you just read into available literature, the amount of work and resources that goes into brackish water-based agriculture, in other words, working with and even developing genotypes that is more tolerant towards brackish water, releasing fresh water for the cities, at the same time changing living habits in the cities like Cape Town. They literally reduce their water consumption. It looks like a set pattern because it continued well into winter by 40%. And if you see what this province has done within the wink of an eye, now the most efficient province in South Africa in terms of the liters of water used per hectare of land irrigated. Just like that. And that is, you can call it smart agriculture, but I think it's just sensible farming and, you know, using available technologies and a constant drive, you know, to adapt. And there's also the market, you know, suddenly the market will penalizing you on your water bill at the end of the month, and that forces you to change your habit. I mean, let's incentivize farmers. The only way that I can stretch my hectares if I'm more efficient, through better knowledge, technologies, integration. So I don't think grabbing, say, we're facing a water scarce or a vulnerable, we're going into a vulnerable era in terms of water availability, just grabbing onto, like Jill said, very, very expensive option, you know, desalinization, because it works in Arabia, in the Middle East, because everything is subsidized. It won't work again, even in Cape Town, which is partly subsidized. There's cross-subsidization in society, but if you go into, you know, typical African city, there is no room for cross-subsidization. It won't necessarily bring solutions. But the macro picture, and I think also macro projects, you know, if you see what the world, the historic world has achieved with moving water around. And if you think about the country just to the north of us, within engineering reach of us, Angola, 60% of all the fresh water running from Africa's surface into the sea is passing through the geographical area with the Congo River in the north and the Kunene River in the south, and many in between is just spilling into the sea in Angola. And I think we're going to also see, in terms of micro technologies with greens on the rooftops in cities, we're also going to see macro engineering projects coming about, not only distributing energy and communication systems, but it's starting to shift water. And yet even this sort of absurd idea that may sound absurd, but it's getting traction, of towing icebergs up from the South Pole to Cape Town. It could be a more cost-effective solution because there's very little capitalization. It's when you need it, you tow them up and you supply, and if you don't need it, you allow it to rest. But the desalinization will capture billions of rand in debt capital that has happened in New Zealand, in Australia, in some of their big cities that has, you know, gone that route, and then the natural rain patterns, you know, recover, and all of a sudden it's dead capital and age technology. So complex questions.
Israel, you know, they kind of exist in the desert, and they export water to most of the surrounding countries. I think that's politically what's keeping the peace. And they have a lot of desalination plants. They also figured out that they grow tomatoes on the farms there, and they learned that they were exporting so many thousands or whatever liters of water by exporting tomatoes. So they stopped exporting tomatoes because they were exporting their water through that. So there's different, like, that's not as simple as there's water in a pipe and flow, but different ways to approach that whole water scarcity thing. And does it mean change the crops that we're growing if it is export crops and not consumption crops? And then also there's a company out of the US and UK, some kind of collaboration called Genesis Systems you know, so instead of desalination, because there's a massive ecological impact and you have to do all the testing and measures of, are the fish going to die, where we stick it, and the resalination of that area's water. You can stick a massive plant, it's kind of like a big air conditioner, and suck water out of the air. It has a lot less of an impact in the surrounding environment because air refills a lot quicker than water. And they're making that cost effective. This company, Genesis Systems, is making it a lot more cost effective, where you can stick one on a farm, or in a small housing development, or something else, instead of these massive industrial type of ways to extract moisture out of the air.
I also think we are looking at it from only one direction. How do we get water for irrigation? How do we put water onto a system? And we're not thinking about how can we retain water inside the existing system. And there's a product out there, an entrepreneur who unfortunately couldn't be here today, who developed a hydrogel. It's called Senmonetsi, water drinker, direct translation. And you mix this hydrogel with your agricultural land. It has no effect on the plant, but it will retain water and it will keep your plants drinking water from this hydrogel, meaning you don't have to water or irrigate as much as you would have. And these are two viewpoints that we should be taking into consideration. Not only how do we put something on top, how do we give it, how do we retain that water.
Hello everybody. I'm not at all from the landward side of the world. I'm more a researcher of the marine world. But I was thinking, and I know for sure that South Africa has a very rich biodiversity, and especially plant biodiversity. And I was thinking, why don't we make use of that? Instead of focusing on getting better, more drought-resistant plants. I mean, that's one solution, but why don't we make it like a broader picture, a more diverse picture, even for food? There's a lot of indigenous eatable plants in the country that could be drought-resistant that we probably don't know. So it's more common, maybe also a question if there's research going on that. And yeah, if we don't have the capability to produce products that feed the world, like only one product, like mice, maybe we should go more broad. Yeah.
Any comments on that?
If you link to his fickle about what we eat, then it's quite easy to relate to the following. There's basically 5 crops that we eat, that we consume globally, which is 90 to 95% of everything that we eat. And most of that money in terms of research and development are spent on those 5. Of which maize by far outstrips everything else. Now, whether that's right or wrong, as a plant breeder, I do have an opinion, and unfortunately it's very commercial. But there's a reason why we have those 5, because they are really productive. And we've basically trained them to be commercially productive. We've bred them to be commercially productive. And it's taken us a odd few thousand years to get to this point. So if you look, for instance, at the wild species that grows on the dunes in the Western Cape, you get something like Farrant, which we've worked in the past with and are still ongoing. And there are definitely genes of interest in there that you can mine, that you can introduce, which will give you salt tolerance to a lesser extent than what one would hope. And the way in which we usually then go about it is to look at how we apply that in already commercial scale. So for instance, typically if you look at the irrigation point with a farmer with wheat, then he will start out with a soil that's not brackish, and as he irrigates and goes towards the end of the season, it will become more brackish. So maize, for instance, is quite intolerant to brackish water, so that's the type of interesting solution that we would like to look at. Would it be nice to go over to pigeon pea, for instance? Slight obsession over the IBB at the moment. Yes, for sure. But the problem is that we have billions of rands of equipment all over the world that's already focused on those 5 commercial crops. And it's going to be almost impossible to change the social and cultural settings that also goes with that, and the mindset. So I would like to have seaweed grow commercially somewhere in the bay, but I just don't see that happening.
Can I comment on the cultural side of that? Because I often wondered why, is anybody here from Kenya or Uganda? From?
Uganda.
Uganda.
And I'm also living in Kenya for 7 years.
I did quite a lot of work in Kenya and Uganda, and I could never understand why Kenyans eat maize and the Ugandans eat plantains, bananas. And I remember being in Uganda and reading a newspaper article by a journalist from Kenya. And he says, if I have to eat another banana, I'm going to go mad. Give me my maize. And yet they're right next to each other. So if anybody can understand how we can change people's preferences to pigeon pea or cassava or yams that are more drought tolerant, it'd be great. But it's a sociologist's job, not mine.
Yeah, but I don't think we must throw her idea away. Because even in South Africa, we have indigenous plants, and a beautiful example here from our region is the rooibos tea. And I couldn't believe last year I had to literally fly out for a day-long meeting in Seattle, and I had 2 hours to spend after the meeting. And I walked into a shop there in a local market, and there were over 20 varietals of rooibos tea, flavored rooibos tea in the middle of Seattle, and I couldn't believe it. And it wasn't even in commercial packaging, it's retail packaging. And so you see what South Africa has done with indigenous sort of property in terms of its game diversity, commercializing it first through game parks and now through game farming, and now really trading in the scarce genotypes. And I think we're scratching the surface, and we need the staple foods to provide space for the niche markets, to create variety, interest. I mean, imagine food without variety in an urban environment. You know, people sometimes is locked into that's the only food source that they have. But it really adds spice to your life, you know, to have the privilege of variety. So I think there we should look at indigenous types, genotypes as niche orientated, and if the market rewards you and you can break through, maybe it can become quite a well established product. But definitely we have to scratch and investigate, and even from an entrepreneurship point of view, assess the viability and the market. But yeah, like what I said, eventually in the marketplace you're going to come up you know, against the big staples. And apparently one of the big changes in African cities onto rice is the conveniency of the food, simply the conveniency. The time to prepare it, you know, to cook, people's lifestyles are changing. The cost of energy to cook rice is way lower than to cook maize. That's changing people's habits. So you need to understand the social drivers, you know, for the choices that the consumer make, because you can't change that to just offering them a product.
Yeah, it's often difficult to change people's habits, especially when it comes to eating. But you are quite correct. There's a huge biodiversity in terms of what we could actually consume all over Africa, quite frankly, very rich. I'm often wondering, should we not draw a line directly between food security and nutritional security? And we focus on food security in terms of all of these crops, which does not really give us a whole lot of nutrition. And we don't, and find our nutritional security in terms of the biodiversity where we exist, and combine the two. So that's a thought that maybe one can think about. Now, you saw the microgreens is here, who's in the audience, who started a company. This is what Danie is also talking about. This is a lifestyle. You know, microgreens is a hype now, and everybody wants to buy it because it looks cute. It's something that you use as a garnish. Little do people know that those microgreens are actually supremely nutritious. Very, very good for your health. And these are small things that we should start considering. Food security and nutritional security.
I would like to interject some commercial sense into this as well. Obviously I'm a bit round, so obviously I consume quite a lot of nutrients as well. But it's not about the consumption, just the consumption if you look at agriculture. You need to take into account that most of the maize that we produce, we use the starch as a byproduct in the industrial process. So when you look at urbanization of food production, it's mainly focused at food production, but you need to think about why we have also the commercial agriculture that we have. And that's basically because modern society uses those in a biorefinery concept, where whether it's just the starch to make whatever product from, we need those en masse. So that's also something to consider. So what's the byproduct from your rooftop garden then? What's the other benefits that you have? And can that also go for instance, go into something else? Or is it recycling waste from the particular building that you're in? So commercial agriculture is also giving you that added benefit. What's the rooftop garden giving me, other than feeling good?
Student, supervisor Daniel, please pose your question.
Yes, I would like to share something which adds to this discussion, because I recently saw a documentary where also this issue of this problem, this challenge of shortage of farmland is addressed, and it was a little bit of a comparison between a solution driven by technology and a solution driven by something else. And the conclusion in that documentary was, and I don't know if this is like generally true, but the solution in that documentary was that you can actually be also very sufficient if you have a very small gardens where you can have a lot of different crops, and this is managed by people with almost no technology. I know that sounds very weird if we see the amazing technology that we have to see, but I've been a gardener by Farrant for a couple of years as well, and you can actually save a lot of water by very simple means if you just have the labor. And especially being in Africa, I was thinking technology definitely is a solution, but in many countries of Africa, I think the technology that we have seen here is simply not available, and or maybe not yet. So I would also think that's worth thinking about promoting the small solutions, the small scale gardening, where there's just like a few gardeners which are capable of managing a very small plot and getting out a lot of crops from this plot as well. Okay, I'm not a gardener, I'm not a professional in that area, but I would just like to share this thought and wonder what your opinion on that is.
Yeah, I'll try to. Let's okay. That model that you says, I mean, it's the biggest production model in Africa, is that small scale subsistence farming. The problem is, as soon as the producer becomes aspirational, which our next generation of youth certainly is through their cell phones. Just look what they want to wear. Right? Imagine what they want to, how they want to live. They're not happy anymore growing up the way that their parents have grown up, because they're exposed to something different. Now, that model works perfectly and has served Africa well, but it cannot provide solutions for Africa's own aspirations into the future, because as soon as that person produces a surplus and he has to sell it, he has to enter the value chain. And the value chain is, the price mechanism in the value chain is this large-scale commercial agriculture. They set the price in the value chain. That's the import price landed for rice in Lagos. And the moment a small farmer produces a surplus and he wants to sell a tomato or a banana or a bowl of rice, he becomes a price taker in the value chain, which is dominated by these big economies of scale, high-tech, very productive, agricultural systems. And that's the problem, where the market dictates whether it's socialist or a capitalist market is beyond the point. It's the free market, you know, that dictates that. And as long as it's subsistence, it protects itself. But the very moment that it produces a surplus, then suddenly it doesn't work.
Okay, maybe just a very quick response to that.
Of course.
I understand, absolutely. And I'm just thinking that because of that, we would just not use a lot of farmland that is in principle available. And that's just because of economics. And we think that, climate smart solutions should also consider economical solutions to exactly prevent this from happening. I think this would enable and empower people, and I think this would also contribute to food security and nutritional security.
Sorry, if I can interject again. I was involved in a TIA-sponsored or paid for by ethanol project a few years ago. One of the nightmarish things that happened is that we got somebody from UCT involved, not the nightmare bit. And that person basically, and it was part of the project funding, did a life cycle analysis and killed our project. So everything that happened in between the nice plans that we had, everything, he just killed it. And I think when we look at climate smart and all of these things at the moment, I would like to see the life cycle analysis. Because if the life cycle analysis is a net positive, then it's a go. If the life cycle analysis that you do from an economic and environmental perspective is not a positive, then it can't be, because then it won't be sustainable. And at the moment, big agricultural ventures are still life cycle negative in many cases. And that's the thing that we need to address. So they're not just not climate smart in many cases, they are basically eating up the environment because of those negative life cycle analysis that you get from the environmental perspective. But the problem is they are positive from a dollar perspective, from a rand and cent perspective. So when the oil price goes up to, I think, $116, then I'm going to start doing my bioethanol project again. Until then, it doesn't work. But my bioethanol project is life cycle neutral from an environmental point of view at the moment already. So that's the kind of figures that we need to see. So out there's an engineer that's going to kill your dreams, but it's the kind of logic interjection that we also need in terms of the research that we do, especially when it comes to these mega projects. And I simply do not believe that a wheat plant takes 1,300 liters of water per kg produced. I must tell you, irrigation farmers will tell you completely otherwise.
I just want to comment on what Willem said about what's the benefit of rooftop farming. I can also add that it can be any type of urban solution that's or innovation that can be added to make the people more aware of they can grow their own food and also create new jobs for a generation that's not aware of agriculture that can be actually accomplished in the city environment. And I also feel that nowadays there's a lot of people living in smaller spaces, and there will be children that will grow up in small spaces, and they will need a place where they can learn how to grow their own food. And if the roof is a place where that can be accomplished, then that is a good option. And it will also benefit where you can interact socially. It doesn't have to be just food focused, but also lifestyle focused, where people can go to the roof. Nowadays you can enclose that area on top, and you can make it like a living, where each person living in a unit can have a space in the roof, on the roof, where they can actually express themselves, growing their own garden, growing their own produce. So it doesn't need to be just crop related, but it can be lifestyle related as well.
That's a good point.
Can I throw Paul under the bus? He's around here somewhere, isn't he?
Yeah, I think Paul.
Who's involved in the university's allotment garden at the moment? That's in the room. So, from the university, from the faculty's point of view, are you involved in the allotment? Excellent. They asked me the other evening to use the tractor to till the field for them. So that's kind of 1-0. But anyway. So tell me about the allotment garden, because SV, you're basically describing a modern version of an allotment garden. And if you're on a train in the UK, for instance, you will pass allotment gardens all the time. If you travel in the Netherlands, you will see allotment gardens all the time. So we've been having it, it's just we're moving it onto the rooftop now. So, but one of the interesting things from a breeding perspective is that those allotment gardens throughout the past couple of decades are also the source of many new cultivars for potatoes, for instance. And you had hobby breeding clubs in the Netherlands, for instance, that produced the most amazing cultivars. They knew nothing of genetics, but they knew all about breeding potatoes and making nice selections. So I think we're reintroducing a modern version of the allotment garden through the roof system.
Well, I'm going to have to cut all of us short on the set that we need to finish up.
I would just like to make one statement. I think urban spaces without this array of agriculture activities, it doesn't necessarily make the city richer, but without it the city is definitely going to be poorer. So I think this is another way of looking at it. It's not generating money in the cities, but it's improving livelihoods in the cities.
Well, we've been given another 20 minutes at least.
Okay, so I didn't really miss a lot of the points, but I did miss quite a bit. But this idea of urban and rooftop gardens in the context of South Africa, how feasible is it? I mean, what about the townships? I hear we're talking about allotment gardens and rooftop gardens. Where is a rooftop in Kaimandi where you can make a rooftop garden in Kaimandi? Is it really feasible in the context of South Africa? I mean, we have to think about it seems so elitist to me to be talking about suburban gardens and things like that. So we've done a project in a school, and they do have those vegetable gardens that they have in the school. But to kind of have a rooftop garden, it's not. It will be in town, in Stellenbosch town, and it will always seem so elitist. It's, you know, like what are your thoughts around that?
I would like to.
I understand that point. It's a very good point you're making. But from my perspective, the rooftop gardens is really when we are starting the migration into the urban centre. So if I'm going to look at it, we're going to look at the centre of Cape Town City, where there's no garden space. And that's where you lift it up onto the rooftop. So you actually give people a chance to grow something sustainably within the city structure.
But how can we help people become money to also
But it's not. This is not.
in
No one is. This is why I say there's a whole range in soil-based.
Yes.
If you can find access to soil, but if you see about the challenges there is how do someone from Kaimandi, if people can't even access a place to build a shack. I mean, this is why we had the land invasion 2 months ago. But this is, if you throw agriculture into that complexity, you're getting nowhere. We don't say use your rooftop farming, not even in Stellenbosch, because there's alternative options. There's a food supply surplus in Stellenbosch. No one have to grow their own food in Stellenbosch, in the center of town, who lives there. But if people outside of town in the poorer areas would like to grow, we should be creative in the social space to provide access to land where people can actually sustain themselves from. But at the moment, it's such an imbalanced social ecosystem. The people can't even find a place. But just look, why are the people coming to Stellenbosch? Remember what I said, what is the drivers for urbanization? A month ago I attended an academic paper where how people try to predict urbanization. And they can't even develop models to predict urbanization, where people are going, because it changes in a very short period of time. And there's an expectation of a better livelihood in the Western Cape. It may be a false perception, because if you look at the living conditions of people arriving here for the first 3 to 5 years, it's not, the grass is not necessarily greener, but people are flocking into the space, and the towns don't have resources and infrastructure. There were no planning for that phenomenon. And as I said, and I think we must point fingers against ourselves, but please don't misunderstand that we say rooftop farming is the solution for food security in Kaimandi. No. I think look at agriculture, what agriculture can provide. And if you can't provide access to land, capital and knowledge, we still trapped.
No, I think you're misunderstanding me.
Okay.
I'm not talking about it in the context of food security. I'm talking about it as it seems so elitist to think about rooftop gardens in the space of just the town of Stellenbosch or just the city of Cape Town. If I live in Kaimandi and I also want to grow my own vegetables, then maybe it's better for me to grow my vegetables than to go and buy it in ShopRite or somewhere on the street market, and it's cheaper for me to grow it myself, right? So if you're thinking in the context of this suburban environment and you're going to have a nice rooftop garden, or in Denmark they do have those cute little loft gardens, it doesn't seem so appealing for a person that will be in Kaimandi. It doesn't seem so appealing for them. Maybe for a person who lives inside Stellenbosch or who lives inside Cape Town, it seems so like a feasible thing to do, right?
Yeah. See, you have a really good point. We shouldn't only focus on rooftop gardening. That's not my wish yet. I don't want to only focus on rooftop gardening. I want to focus on innovation and solution-driven ideas around being climate smart, around building certain technologies to help everyone grow plants. The most prominent thing that's just continuously in the news is the rooftop farming, and that is a solution in a lot of cities with a lot of people, mega cities, where there literally is no space for anything. That's why they lift it off the ground to garden. But when we want to look at subsistence farming, then you're starting to look at, yes, okay, maybe I cannot do this on my rooftop. Can there be other solutions? And this is where the entrepreneurs come in, to drive these things. Maybe not put it on the roof, maybe not have a plot in an allotment garden. What other ideas can we bring about? And I know people with a few different ideas, which I'm not going to talk about because that's not mine to go off. But these are definitely things that people are looking at, passionate about wanting to provide subsistence farmers with, an innovative idea and solution, a climate smart solution, other than rooftop.
I don't think the rooftop garden, it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. Like, there is no space in New York City to grow food. So, gut a building, stick some vertical plants in there, vertical farms in there. It's a necessity. And the necessity is getting airtime because they have the resources to fly a drone camera through there and take all the film and then upload it to YouTube and send it to us and be like, oh, look at how innovative they are in New York or New Jersey. Sorry, same thing. To build these urban gardens. We have to contextualize that. And what does that look like? So take that inspiration, and then, okay, they're making alternative plans besides 100 hectares and rows of crops and tractors driving around. What can we do in our context to change that? And even in suburban, we have 2 avo trees, our neighbors have a lemon tree, we can swap. Like, what innovative contextual things can you do to try to get some kind of, even small scale, differences of how to do the food farming thing?
I have a different question. When you think about solutions in general, do you consider methods that could maybe increase the rainfall? Like, spreading some forest of concentration in the air, or maybe growing the coastal forest that could facilitate spreading the moisture from the coast to the inside of the country? Or is it considered at all for
making clouds, making rain?
Yeah, because the way to do good, I don't think I can.
Harvesting the mist on the west coast from the cold Atlantic Ocean on the warmer inland areas has been considered. But again, there, even if you recover the water, the soil quality there is so poor, the distance from markets is so far, the alternative supply is so competitive that the water is not going to solve. But that definitely on the Namibian coast, even for urban use in Walvis Bay and Loedolff in these towns, definitely there's prototypes going up. There's big controversy inland in South Africa. I think most of it is fake news of either flight paths of planes changing, rainfall patterns, and the government seeding clouds to rain in certain areas and not others. But I think that's mainly fake news. So I don't think Africa has reached that scale where we try to manipulate atmospheric conditions, to address environmental risks or to draw on environmental potential. I just don't think we have the technology and the economy to support those technologies, as yet.
So maybe instead of that, growing the coastal forest, so some kind of plants that would live in the same areas. I know that this is not really the climate for that totally, but like originally, but actually corn was originally not here either. So. The other day, at an academic forum such as Stellenbosch, was unfortunate, but someone gave an overview of sea level, expected sea level rise, and he actually showed how much of the Western Cape, one of the wonders of the world, the floral biosphere, has been absorbed, and how the flux was, in evolutionary time frames, enormous flux. There's now more of the biodiversity under seawater than there is exposed above seawater. So we had sea level rise and fluxes over time from an evolutionary perspective for many times. But I don't know how much is really in our means, particularly in a developing country which is nothing other than a developing economy like South Africa, or really low-income countries such as Africa. But there's untapped resources. This is why first world countries is investing in African agriculture on a large scale, because they are underutilized land and underutilized resources. But unfortunately, their business models do not do that to supply even African markets. So they're tapping into Africa's agricultural and natural resources to produce products for external markets. And that's also a very unfortunate thing. We're sitting here complaining about subsistence and rooftop farming, and big first world investment, and it's not even countries, it's investors that seeing an opportunity. They're providing short-term relief through jobs, they're contributing through taxes that maybe doesn't go much further than the government coffers. And they're cashing in by exporting those commodities. Even just they're doing it in African currencies. Their input cost is African currencies, which is low in value, and just the export potential, just the currency swap is already a huge sort of profit on their bottom lines. Interesting times. But I think we owe it to people in Kaimandi. I think we must be able to think across that lines, not just only into the visual blue sky technologies, but really can we find authentic solutions for Africa's problems. And the only people that is going to do it is us as Africans. It's the solutions won't come from Singapore for Africa.
No,
Promise. If they tap into Africa, it will be for their own benefit, not ours.
Absolutely not, but it's an idea. And as Africans, we build around ideas. We live and we develop, and we are being innovative to get solutions to our problems.
Sometimes you're more resilient than innovative.
I would just like to add to your comment regarding the incompatibility of all of the grand technology abroad in Asia, America, and Europe, and really amazing tech, controlled environmental agriculture, but it's very capital intensive and very technologically intensive. So how can you expect a system like that to work in Africa, where the circumstances are completely different, where the majority of the population is not actually living in buildings in urban areas, the majority of the population is living in rural townships such as Kaimani. And I believe the solution to that could be through innovative products, so new products, new agricultural products that can be positioned in locations like that, and that can also be run by individuals in those locations. So you're simultaneously, creating jobs, creating new skills, and also solving the food issue. And I think that's more decentralized method. So no longer having a massive farm 4 hours away from the city, rather have decentralized farms, that provide for the neighborhood. Now I'd like to see that happening, and then I think that technology would actually diffuse throughout the country, because I think news travels quite fast, and the way that you could do it would spread from neighbor to neighbor to neighbor, and then that's a potential outcome that I believe could happen, something that I would like to contribute to.
I'm going to have to ask for last comments. Willem,
in the rural areas, most people have a piece of land where they grow their own food, so it's highly subsistent. But if you want to upscale that, of course, technology is one of the big missing factors in rural environments. For suburbs and townships, if you go to a township, there is no space. There is people on top of each other. So how do you introduce agriculture in a space like that?
We must also keep in mind the biggest portion is, in the South African context, of rural people is not rural anymore. There's migration happening, and we have to consider that it's becoming urban. They're moving to the urban centers, in which case, cities are going to start to become crowded, and that's just one of the parts of solutions that we have. But I do take all of this into consideration, as we should. It's very important. So I'm going to ask Willem to kind of give a closing comment, and then by all means, everyone is free to discuss after this with each other and amongst each other.
I think we also need to consider that as we urbanize, we also use up the best farmlands for urbanization. If you look at traditionally how towns, cities developed 100, 150, 200 years ago, it was usually agriculture on the fringe of the town, and as you moved and the town grew, it pushed up agriculture to the outskirts. But usually when agriculture developed in a certain area together with the town, it was because there were water sources and there were good agricultural land. And you see it all over South Africa. If you look at Durbanville and that area over there, some of the best high potential soils in the Western Cape. We mostly have rocks in our province in terms of on which we farm, which is terrible. That's why we get the low yields that we have and shallow soils. Well, we use up the best land for urban areas. But I think together with that, we also need to ask ourselves the question in South Africa, which we don't, is how would we like to redefine food security? Is food security giving everyone income potential to buy food, or is it to be able to grow some food and add money to that? Or is it being able to grow your own food? And it's not a one-fits-all solution. If you're in an urban area and you're a subsistence farmer, you're probably going to need some kind of government grant or assistance to be able to have food security. But if you're urbanized, you need to have the income potential, you need to have a job in order to have food security. And we need to make sure that we have that. So we had a job summit recently, but part of that solution of being job secure is agri-food processing, because it creates jobs and big commercial farming coming in. So at the moment for me, if I look at the allotment garden and I look at the rooftop garden, I look at any type of urban gardening, then I look at something that some people will make money from, but most of us will use that to anchor ourselves to the environment and do it for the fun of it and our children's education and that type of thing. But I don't think it's going to contribute to the poorest of the poor being more food secure. And we're striving towards that perhaps, but not at the moment.
Right. Thank you very much.